So wonderful to be here today to talk about how do we build bridges in the communities that we work in, and what does that mean for housing justice? I want to start off with a few facts. Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, a famous educator here from the Atlanta area, stated, "Failure is not a sin, but low aim is." So I ask you today, in this audience, in this room, how is your aim? Because the system is definitely failing. Here are a few facts. Housing costs are increasing faster than incomes, making housing increasingly unaffordable, especially across major urban areas and for those with lower incomes. Secondly, 1 out of 6 families and individuals spend more than 50% of their incomes on housing, having to make decisions between food choices, educational choices, and healthcare. Thirdly, in addition to the home prices increasing, mortgage credit availability remains tight, further constraining equitable access to home ownership for the vast majority of those who do finance their homes. And affordable home ownership supply has been at an all-time low, meaning that we have a deficit of nearly 4 million units across the US to provide housing for those who are in need. However, there is a glimmer of hope. Home ownership remains being one of the major drivers for intergenerational wealth. And what we have here today is a panel of experts to talk about how do we get here, and then what are the solutions in order to bring us out of this conundrum. So Richard, I want to start with you. Why don't you give us a bit of your perspective about how we got here? What are some of the historic and current housing systems that impacted us? And what are the systemic barriers that we really truly need to remove in order to address this issue?
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, yeah. We used to be a much more residentially, racially non-segregated society than we are today. And you know this, although it's easy to forget it. In the early 20th century, mid-20th century, we had a lot more desegregation, a lot more equal housing opportunities than we have today. Here in Atlanta, we're here to celebrate Dr. King's birthday today. Dr. King started school in 1935 at the David Howard Elementary School. When you read his autobiography and the autobiography of other well-known civil rights leaders who grew up in Atlanta, you'll read that they had to walk by white schools in order to get to their black school. Well, today, if we had segregated schools, black children wouldn't be walking by white schools to get to their black school. They'd be too far away. The only way you could walk by a white school if you were going to a black school was if they were nearby, if there was a broadly non-segregated neighborhood. And this was true all over the country. Langston Hughes, the great African poet, novelist, playwright, wrote in his autobiography how he grew up in an integrated downtown Cleveland neighborhood. Some of you may have read that autobiography. He said his best friend in high school was Polish. He said he dated a Jewish girl in high school. This was an integrated high school in an integrated neighborhood. Well, what happened? In Atlanta, the federal government came in 1933 and built its first public housing project in an integrated downtown Atlanta neighborhood called the Flats, close to downtown. It was about 1/3 black, 2/3 white. The Public Works Administration, in one of its first acts, and actually its first act in housing, built a project for whites only, displacing the African Americans who lived in that area out of that non-segregated neighborhood into less adequate housing elsewhere. In Cleveland, where Langston Hughes grew up, the Public Works Administration in the central neighborhood where he lived, the integrated neighborhood I just described, built 2 projects, one for whites, one for African Americans, creating segregation where it hadn't previously existed. This happened all over the country. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, the home of Harvard and MIT, the central neighborhood of Cambridge was an integrated neighborhood, black and white. The Public Works Administration demolished housing there, integrated housing, and built 2 separate projects, one for whites, one for African Americans, creating a pattern of segregation in that community and in Atlanta and in Cleveland and St. Louis, a pattern of segregation that still persists today. Well, that was just one of the programs the federal government implemented, the creation of public housing to destroy non-segregated neighborhoods. Another, here in Atlanta, was the school board. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were white and black schools when they were segregated schools who were pretty close to each other. In the 1920s, the city of Atlanta developed a master plan. Never officially adopted it because it was racially explicit and that was unlawful. It knew it was unlawful, but it had clearly marked areas on the plan which were white, clearly marked areas that were black. The school board looked at that map and decided to close schools for black students in areas that were marked on the plan map as being white, potentially. And it built new schools for black children in neighborhoods that were designated to be black, creating segregation where it hadn't previously existed and separating whites and blacks in ways they had never previously been segregated. They did this, school boards did similar things in other southern cities, Houston, Raleigh. Some of these are described in a new book by Karen Benjamin that describes how school boards throughout the South used the desire to create residential segregation by placing schools for whites and blacks in separate areas. If black parents in Atlanta wanted their children to be educated, they had to leave their homes and move to a black neighborhood from the white neighborhoods where they previously lived. One of the biggest programs that the federal government implemented to create segregation where it hadn't previously existed was the Federal Housing Administration's program of subsidized mortgages. We all know them today. They're 30-year amortized mortgages. The Federal Housing Administration had a program in the years after World War II. It even began before that, but ramped up in the years after World War II to move the entire white population, white working class, lower middle class population living in these urban areas that I described, move them out of those urban areas into all white suburbs from which African Americans were going to be excluded. The suburbs that we see in every metropolitan area of this country, here in Atlanta, as well as in every other metropolitan area, were largely created in the 1940s and 1950s by the Federal Housing Administration for whites only. There was a racially explicit program, nothing hidden about it. It was unlawful, unconstitutional, but the Federal Housing Administration and Veterans Administrations did it anyway. They had a manual that they distributed to appraisers all over the country, whose job it was to evaluate the application of builders to build these new suburban developments. The manual said that you couldn't approve for a federal bank guarantee the application of an appraiser for a development that was going to have blacks in the same development as whites. The manual went so far as to say that you couldn't even recommend for a federal bank guarantee the proposal of a developer who was going to build an all-white project if it was going to be located near where African Americans were living. Because in the words of the manual, that would run the risk of infiltration by inharmonious racial groups. The segregation that we know today is not a natural phenomenon. It's the result of explicit, unconstitutional, unlawful federal housing policy that was designed, as I say, unlawfully, and I want to emphasize this again, unconstitutionally, to separate the races in a way they had never been separated before. We had segregated schools, we had many other institutions that were segregated, but housing was never segregated until the federal, state, and local governments decided to implement those programs. Now, social scientists are known for many, many years that when you create distance between people, it creates stereotypes, misunderstandings, and hostility. The only way to overcome that, to bridge communities, is to give people access to each other, to allow them to get to know each other. We used to make fun of people many years ago. We said some of my best friends are Negroes, white people. But actually, that was a very important phenomenon. You don't have very many people, except in the professional classes today, who can say that anymore. Obviously, Langston Hughes, when he was growing up in a poor neighborhood, could say that. His friends could say that. People who were growing up in the neighborhood where Martin Luther King grew up could say that. People can't say that anymore because we live so separately. It's a circle. Segregation creates hostility because people only have stereotypes. They don't have real people that they know of the opposite race. But the stereotypes then promote segregation because when they mistrust each other, when they dislike each other, when they have stereotypes of each other, they don't want to live near one another. So how do you break the circle? Well, the only way to do it is to create the kinds of biracial groups, organizations that can bind themselves together to take action to redress these unconstitutional policies. I wrote a subsequent book with my daughter called Just Action, which goes through action after action that people like all of us can take in our own local communities to begin to reverse the process of segregation that our government at all levels has created. It's our obligation. It's not just an opportunity. It's our obligation, both blacks and whites' obligation, because if we take our responsibilities as citizens of this country seriously, we have to understand if there are unconstitutional remnants of policies that are unlawful, we have an obligation to redress them. But the only way to do it is to get off our phones, start meeting with our neighbors and our friends, create biracial organizations, and take the action that can move us in a different direction than our government has moved us throughout the 20th century.
Thank you, Richard. Setting the context, explaining the history, ensuring that we understand that this wasn't by happenstance, but we can solution our way out of this. And so I'm going to move to Rosalind, who is the CEO of Atlanta Habitat for Humanity. Now, Habitat's known for building the houses, right? Everybody talks about the houses that Habitat builds. But in your role as CEO and engaging, we not only build houses, we really do build homes, which is different. We build community and we bring hope. Based on your experience in working at Habitat and working in the communities more broadly, how do you move the community from thinking about us being a house builder to being a community builder and bridging that gap and starting that solutioning space?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And first of all, thank you so much, Richard, for everything that you shared and for setting the context with history and really understanding how did we get here in the first place. And forgive me, because part of what I'm going to talk about is how Atlanta habitats everywhere, and communities that look just like Atlanta saw that as an opportunity to do good work and empower people who had been disempowered, disenfranchised, displaced. So to go back to your question, yes, I'm proud that people think of beautiful, energy efficient homes when they think of Atlanta Habitat or any habitat, and that we build those homes together in partnership, not only with the home buying family, and let me emphasize that family is a home buyer, okay? There is nothing that is given away for free except for love at Habitat. But really, we focus so much on empowering the individual in front of us who shows up and asks us to be their partner in helping achieve their dream of affordable home ownership for themselves and their families. And so, it really starts with having humility and listening and holding empathy, right? Really trying to see the person in front of you for who they are and what they want and what they aspire to be, what they aspire to build in their lives, and saying, as your partner, here's how I'm going to help you get there. And so I'd say, yes, building a home is part of that. And I'll get back to that in a moment. We help them build, we don't build custom homes, we build personalized homes. There's a difference. But we are really building communities as we build all those homes. But my favorite part of our mission, our business, is that we're building people. We're building people. We have the fortune by design of being vertically integrated. So Atlanta Habitat is so much more than a thoughtful home builder with the families that show up for our program, but we also are their education resource. 1 out of 10 families that shows up for our program who wants to buy a home has no idea what it means to qualify for a home. They typically don't understand their credit, if it's good or bad, why they need it, why it matters, and perhaps they haven't had knowledge of why it's important to save, not just for the rainy day, but for your dream. And so we spend a lot of time and resources, but a lot of love and thoughtfulness in really sitting them down and pouring all that wisdom into them. Part of what happened in segregating communities, segregating families, and this goes way back even before the 1930s, right? We talk about history here in America, is we lost the ability to be unified in our family homes and have those conversations around the dinner table about how really to create and build wealth, what it means to own something and how that empowers not just today, but all these children to follow for the generation of our family. So we get to stand in that gap. We set that kitchen table and we sit down and we pour in all that learning, that knowledge about what this really means and why it matters and how you're going to protect it once you achieve it. Then we set about building that home and empower them with the choice. What do you want this home to be? What fits your needs? How should it look? What community you want to be in? Look at this map of the city of Atlanta and South Fulton County. Find your place based on what is your place in your family, your work, your children's school, so that we can plant you exactly where you want to be rooted, where you want to be invested, where you want to help spark growth and vitality and vibrance in a community. And then we set about the business to do that. And then we do that with all of the other families who choose those communities with them. And before you know it, now you have this vibrant group of stakeholders that are really invested not only in those four walls, but in everything that happens in that community. And they've built the muscles with our help to also be advocates for themselves, to go to their councilmen and women, to go to their neighborhood associations, to show up at their kids' school and know exactly how to engage and advocate and stand up for what they want. And as a result, our families are moving forward stronger than before. They are furthering their education. They are advancing their careers. They are able to save for their futures and make better choices wherever they go, for insurance, for groceries, you name it. The financial stability, but confidence, belonging that comes from this program. All of that starts with intention and how we even set up the mission, right? And how we set up the programs.
Thank you, Rosalind. So we've talked about the historical context, right? And we've talked about real time, what is the solution around hopefully impacting that historical context. We know you can't do it alone. We have to have a multi-sector approach. And this is where Ashani and ANDP comes into play. Can you highlight just a bit around examples of partnerships that you've engaged in, how you are looking at, all of the different products that you afford families across the Atlanta area. How do you actually bring that all together when we're thinking about a multi-sector approach when looking at housing, be it on the rental side or even on the home ownership side?
Well, thank you, Adrienne. First of all, I want to just say hello to everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the beloved community as we look to pursue that. And I just want to reiterate, I am not Miss Tanika, who was introduced earlier. My name is Ashani Omard. I serve as president of the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, also known as ANDP. We have been around for just over 34 years. And why this conversation is so important and this topic is so important is because the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership specifically was designed to really promote public-private partnerships And we really get at the core of the issue where we started with Richard regarding the role that the government has played intentionally in creating policies. And so when we were started by an amazing leader by the name of Miss Hattie B. Dorsey, she knew that the government had to be a very intentional part of the solution. So we were really formed out of a merger between the Chamber's Housing Resource Center. So we have Metro Atlanta Chamber. They had a Housing Resource Center that actually merged with a department that was out of Invest Atlanta. And that allowed us to really bring to the table not only intentional work on the policy side and with federal partners and local partners, but also corporate partners and philanthropic partners who also had to be a part of the solution. And so everything that we've done, even going back to 1991, has really focused on how we promote racial equity through scalable housing solutions. What that looks like today is a couple of things. That's how we build bridges through something called the Closing the Gap campaign. And I should also shout out our board member, Ms. Natasha, who is in the audience. Thank you for your leadership as we promote the Closing the Gap initiative. It was actually a 5-year initiative that we launched in the middle of COVID, a very ambitious goal of creating and or preserving over 2,000 homes. As a part of that work, we set out to raise $18 million in philanthropic investments. Now, we just closed on that as of December the 31st, and I'm very proud to report not only were we able to focus on creating and preserving 213 homes, we were also able to invest in over 2,600 homes across the metro area, and that was through our loan fund. So we also are a CDFI. We do a couple things. We advocate, we develop, and we lend into affordable housing. And so what that looks like is $227 million that ANDP was able to invest over a 5-year period. And what that really means is that for every dollar of philanthropy we raised, we were able to leverage 25 other dollars, whether it was social impact capital, federal dollars through New Markets tax credits, through capital magnet funds, through NeighborWorks America. But because of those additional dollars, we were able to rotate that capital and do more. Why that's important? When we talk about systems change and how we go from just building one home to really making sure that we are shifting the narrative and we're shifting trajectories of families being able to access pathways to home ownership, pathways to wealth building, we've got to do that at scale. And that is what ANDP from the beginning, that's what we've always focused on.
Thank you, Ashani. And look, we just got the wave that we have 5 minutes in. I am so sorry. We've got to have a little bit of a conversation right here. If you could bear with us, maybe we can have 2 more minutes, in addition to the 5 minutes. So we've gotten background here. And I know we could probably talk about this and engage in this for a number of hours on end, and we do have a schedule to keep to. But here's my one question that I would love for you all to engage in. How does bridge building, in thinking about these communities and communities that you play a role in, and thinking about the historical perspective and thinking about the systemic barriers that exist, how does bridge building actually allow us to minimize the us versus them kind of mentality and actually come together to really focus on impacting housing at scale in order to refute all of those facts that I notated and talked about at the beginning when we're thinking about and build intergenerational wealth and ensure that our kids are going to be safe and that people can pay for their health care and that people don't have to make a decision between a food desert or educational possibilities because they actually have wonderful shelter. How does bridge building come into play? I mean, I've got to believe we know that's one of the solutioning aspects, but how have you all leveraged it, and how have you seen it in your research, as well as some of the things that you've done and partnered with Richard over the last few years when that comes into play? And I swear I will close it up. I'm not too much off the beaten path there, but yes, if you all could, I think that would be a good kind of conversation to have real quickly.
Well, I'll try to be very, very brief. As I indicated earlier, to change all this requires not just well-intentioned organizations, but it requires local community groups of ordinary people that get together and decide to work together to achieve these things. There are examples of this all over the country. I can refer you to articles that we've written about them. One common theme of them is Come to the Table, where they invite equal numbers of blacks and whites from different neighborhoods to dinner every week or every month, and they eventually develop action plans. In our recent book, Just Action, we talk about 6 churches in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 3 white, 3 black, all Presbyterian churches. They never had anything to do with each other. They created something called the Presbyterian Interracial Dialogue, a fixed number of whites from the white churches, a fixed number of African Americans from the black churches, who met regularly, read books together, developed action plans to create the kind of bridge building in Winston-Salem that you're referring to. It's not something that organizations can do. It's something that can only be done at the grassroots level, and that requires people stepping up and taking active roles in creating these kinds of organizations.
I agree. And I would say, so I'm going to approach it in 2 ways, and I'm going to try to be brief, maybe not as brief as you, Richard, but I would say Habitat's model is such a great exemplar of this, where we are bringing together people from all walks of life as volunteers to help their neighbor build their home. And also, we say it doesn't matter if you have previous experience. In fact, hardly anyone on our build sites as volunteers anyway have any prior experience with construction or repairing or painting or whatever the project may be to either build a new home or preserve that home. What makes them valuable is simply their presence, their energy, and their goodwill, right? The fact that they showed up today to get something done in support of someone else. And the beautiful thing is that the bridge building that happens is simply people connecting as human beings and talking about the things that they have in common. Their parents, or they grew up in Atlanta, and they talk about their favorite places where they went to go eat, or traditions, or whatever you name it. They talk about when they're out there swinging that hammer together, or when they sign the walls of that home buyer's home with blessings and wishes for a prosperous life. And what that means, people cry together, they hold hands and they pray together, or they just sit in stillness with that look of understanding between each other, that one human to another, I care about you and I see you. We set the conditions for those interactions to happen in every single build and project that we do at Habitat, and that is by design. That is the core of our mission. But I want to also share this for perspective. We understand the concept of bridge building almost with anything else in our lives that we care about. When it comes to sports teams, or if it comes to something like planning a wedding, usually, okay, you may find a coordinator, but that coordinator is going to do what? That coordinator for that wedding or that special event is going to find somebody of all the different talents and skill sets that you need to make that event memorable and beautiful and spectacular. When we think about our favorite sports teams, I was just at the chamber this morning. We talked all about FIFA World Cup. We know how to put together a roster of really talented people. It doesn't matter what country they come from or language they speak, what God they worship. It just matters how good is their footwork and where can they be on that field to get the ball in that goal. When it comes to things that feel like they don't bear as much weight on our personal lives, or we just want it bad enough, we understand how important it is to bring people of different perspectives together and create community among them to get something really meaningful done. If we could just apply that to all things, including housing and how we build and revitalize our communities, we'd be doing just fine. That's what bridge building is all about.
And I would just add, yeah, that deserves a clap. Yes. Thank you, Roz. And I would just add A&DP. I think of bridge building at A&DP in a couple of buckets. We've already talked about this bridge to capital, this bridge to private public partnerships. But the other bridges that I think are important lifting up is how we interface with our residents, with our leaders within the community. There's often this thought of creating spaces to quote unquote listen to the community, but we've got to be very intentional about how we invest and allow residents to be co-creators, which we were just talking about. And the way that shows up in A&DP is in a couple ways. One, it's through the down payment assistance that we're able to provide home buyers as they are looking to fill that financial gap. But also, we host something called a Neighbors Together convening that every year we participate in something called the Community Leadership Institute. It's a national program sponsored by NeighborWorks America. We will recruit resident leaders from across the metro area to be a cohort, and they curate the theme of the Neighbors Together convening. So earlier today, when we participated in mediation, it made me smile because our last cohort last June was solely focused on health and wellness, and that was driven by the neighborhood cohort. We focused on neighborhood branding. We focused on community safety. Whatever our resident leaders decide to participate in, that becomes the theme, and we simply are there to invest and underwrite an annual convene. But what's also important about this is not only do they have a chance to gather to exchange best practices, we've trained over 50 leaders who then have trained over 1,100 leaders through the conference. It also allows them an opportunity to really build this local infrastructure based on the needs of what's happening in their neighborhoods, on their streets. And many of our resident leader alums have gone on to run for city council within their local jurisdictions. They have secured additional financing or community improvement grants. And so it's just creating an infrastructure that, again, is intentional and allowing there to be a shared voice and not just, hey, this is what we want you to do. But it's really inclusive of the residents who believe, who've invested in the neighborhoods that are being impacted by our Community Leadership Institute.
Thank you. And I want to thank the panel. So, bridge building, being intentional, bridge building, being inclusive, bridge building, bringing different perspectives to the table so that we can all learn from one another and align. We got to remember that we choose to believe in love and justice, and those are actions. That loving thy neighbor within the aisles, across the aisles, outside of here, in another country, is what we do through service. It's not with our ego that we lead. It's really with our hearts. And when we are intentional about bridge building, the results are evident. And they've been noted here, right here today on this stage. So thank you all for sharing your time.
Will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood?
We must reflect the spirit and heart of King
To make America what it ought to be.
to transform unjust systems.
To inspire all of us, we may triumph.
Free at last! Free at last!